There seems to be rising tensions between China and Australia.
That's right, Lisa. In response to some comments made by the Chinese ambassador that were reported in the Australian Financial Review newspaper yesterday, essentially saying that Chinese consumers might stop sending their kids to Australian universities, might stop going for holidays in Australia and stop purchasing Australian beef and wine if Australia's response to the coronavirus continued in the way that it was going. China very unhappy about the federal government's call for there to be an independent international investigation into the world's handling of COVID-19, including the initial response by Chinese officials amid concerns that officials in that country weren't entirely upfront with the globe and haven't been about the number of cases and the way that it was initially handled. Australia is viewing the comments from the ambassador as a threat from Beijing to Australia's economy, and the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Francis Adamson, held what we understand was a lengthy phone conversation with the Chinese ambassador yesterday to express the government's displeasure at those comments reported in the AFR newspaper. Simon Birmingham is the Trade Minister and a part of the Foreign Affairs and Trade portfolio. He was speaking to you earlier here on News Breakfast.
We won't be changing our public policy position on the face of such a serious public health matter in the face of any threats of coercion from any other nation.
Simon Birmingham there responding to these comments from Australia's largest trading partner, a relationship that's often rocky, but that intervention from the ambassador yesterday being viewed very seriously within the government, Lisa.
OK, thanks very much, Dan. Well, let's get more on that rising tension with China and bring in China analyst with the Lowy Institute, Richard McGregor. Good morning, Richard. Thanks for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you.
Richard, just to that point that Dan was making then about the phone call that was made between the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Francis Adamson, and the Chinese ambassador, I can imagine conversations like that don't happen very often.
Well, they certainly don't. I mean, this is a particularly... We've had, as your correspondent said, a rocky relationship with China. This is a new low point. For obvious reasons. Both countries are having a big fight over the coronavirus and the origins of it. She did stop short of calling him in, which I guess in diplomatic terms is a more serious censure. But I think that she would have wanted to have made clear to him personally exactly what the Australian government position was.
And the Australian government, as Simon Birmingham was pointing out this morning, is not stepping back from this, that they want this international inquiry to go on into China's actions leading up to the virus. But where do you see it going from here? I mean, the words from the Chinese ambassador were pretty clear, and that could be very costly for Australia.
Well, it could be. There's a couple of things to say. I mean, this is not the first time that China has threatened or used economic coercion against a foreign country over a political issue. In many cases, their bark is worse than their bite. In other words, if they do take sanctions against a country, they tend to target them pretty specifically. And the reason for that is that every sort of ban on imports, if you like, into China, or bans that they officiate against another country, that hurts them as well, and they're not keen on that. So they do it in a very targeted fashion. But I might say, though, that, you know, Australia isn't backing down. It shouldn't be backing down. But for such an important initiative like this, I was a bit surprised that we didn't sort of, you know, ginger up support amongst other countries for the same initiative before going public with it ourselves. It would be much better as an international initiative rather than just an Australian one.
And just to remind viewers, Richard, it's now 9 days since Marise Payne was on Insiders, and that's where it was first raised that she wanted this global approach. But you're suggesting perhaps the global bit of it should have been nailed down first.
Well, a little bit. You know, the Chinese always say that Australia is a US lackey. We're just following the US. I'm not quite sure why they're saying that on this occasion, because I don't think the US has said exactly what we've said. So far, I think the UK, in one form or another, not at the prime ministerial level, has supported us. The French and the Germans, who are kind of the key swing states on China issues, have demurred. I think the Japanese haven't said anything so far. So it would be good if we could win some allies to this cause.
Richard, just finally, one of our colleagues, Peter Harcher, has written a piece this morning in the Nine newspapers where he says that the mask has been taken off to reveal the gangster beneath when it comes to China. Do you feel that this has revealed something about China, the process that and the language that they've been using?
Well, I don't think it really tells us anything we didn't already know. But I think the important point here is that the ambassador talks about a consumer-led boycott. You don't have consumer-led boycotts in China unless they're led by the government. So it's a government-led consumer boycott. That's the important thing to remember. It's not ordinary Chinese people jumping up and down saying, I'm not going to go to Australia, I'm not going to eat Australian beef, and so forth. The important point about this is that this is the Chinese government, not Chinese consumers.
Well, we'll see whether it actually occurs. Richard McGregor, thank you for your time.
Thank you.